Good afternoon. On behalf of Jen and Ethan, Vivian, Susan, Catherine, Jeffrey, and their extended families, I'd like to welcome all of you to this tribute to John Carl Scarinza. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Sarah Usdin Gallup, and like many of you, I'm a longtime family friend of the Scarinzas. I'm honored to assist with today's service as we remember a larger-than-life individual who embodied and lived out simple values: love, loyalty, family, integrity, hard work, and a dedication to the natural world. Throughout his life, John touched us all through his various professions, avocations, and volunteer pursuits. We've worked with him, relied on him, and been grateful for him. And we've laughed with him. Each of us has reveled in his one-of-a-kind stories and jokes, often told at his own expense. It felt like John was everywhere, with everyone, and made everything happen. John died late in the evening of April 22nd, Earth Day. Early the next morning, a rare cloud formation appeared over our region called undulatus asperatus. The massive clouds looked like the surface of a very rough sea. I know many of you saw it. Asperatus clouds form during times of turbulence and are a sign of extreme instability. After the appearance of the clouds, it then proceeded to rain heavily all day. Today, we will sing hymns, hear readings and reflections, bask in a slideshow of memories, join our hearts together, and give thanks for the life of an amazing man. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Town and Country Inn and the Labnon family for their gracious hospitality, Lieutenant Mike Cody and New Hampshire State Police Troop F for escorting John's casket, pianist Angela Brown for leading our hymns, and fiddler Paul Cormier for his closing send-off. And on behalf of John's extended family, I want to acknowledge the outpouring of comfort, help, and kindness that has come from every corner of this room. The family is truly grateful for your loving support.
My name's Susan Marmer. I'm John's sister. The Spirit of Mount Washington, written by Margaret Simpson. Have you answered the mountain's summons in the crimson and gold fall? Have you wandered out in the forest and heard the outdoors call? Have you stood on the mountainside, mountain summit, and gazed down the sunset trail and watched the mists of the evening wrap the silent hills in their veil? You will feel the joy of living in the beauty of the earth and sky, and your ear may catch the murmur of angels passing by. Come out, ye weary people. Lift up your eyes from the sod. Come drink in the mountain's grandeur and list to the voices of God. And high in the silent mountains, as you gaze on the hills below, the taint of the earth will leave you, the pride in your heart will go. You will see the smile of the Maker in the midst of the sentinel's grand. You will get a glimpse of the power and skill of the Master's hand.
Hi, my name is Barbara Arnold, and this is Bill, and we've had the privilege of living next to John for quite some time, and we've also had the privilege of being his friend. In 1998, Randolph experienced an ice storm, and I'm sure many of you were here for that, or knew of it, or heard of it, or whatever. The most damage occurred between about 1,700 and 2,000 feet. Think Randolph Hill. Bill was doing radio call with the RMC, and the RMC caretaker reported that it was nothing but rain. What the heck was he talking about? And with that, we were listening to trees explode and come down, and we looked out, and that was that. The next morning dawned beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and we donned our hard hats, and we went out. And the world had changed. There was a half-inch coating of ice everywhere we looked. It was like walking on ball bearings everywhere we went. There was no way to leave where you were if you were on Randolph Hill. There was no way. During this, the town had some difficulty getting plows where they needed to be and all that kind of thing. And our friend John decided with his brother Jeffrey that the plow was broken. And they drove it down Route 16. I don't believe the plow lifted up at all, did it? No. Sparks flying, everything down there, and they got it fixed. Later on that night, John was still trying to plan what we were going to do to get our town out and moving. We have a lot of people who need help, and we needed to get to them. And we look up, Bill and I look up, and there's this man standing at our door. And he comes in, and it's John, and he says, "Well, Bill, what are we going to do?" And Bill says, "I don't know, John, what are we going to do?" And so they talked, and they made a plan, and all this kind of stuff, and at this point, Bill says, "John, would you like some scotch?" And John says, "Oh yeah, I think scotch would be really good, but, I don't drink scotch, but, what the hey, I'll try." And so I don't think it was just one scotch that night. It was a rather tough night. And John went home, and we went to bed. And John, when we saw him the next morning, looked at Bill and said, "What the was in that scotch? I haven't had a headache like this for years." So that was our first real meeting of John the man, and John our neighbor, and John who gets things done. The ice storm had a very, very good effect. It created a set of trees and an area in Randolph that really wasn't much good for anything anymore. They salvaged, the people who owned it salvaged all the wood and did what they could do, but then, you know, it was going to be decades before it was going to be good for them anymore. And John and David Wilcox decided that perhaps this was the time, with others, that maybe Randolph needed a community forest. And maybe this was the way that, or the method that we could lead to preserving our town or parts of our town. And with David Wilcox and others, they created the Randolph Community Forest, which initially was about 11,000 acres, now over 12,000 acres. It has preserved the land and the waterways and the trails and a way of life that the town of Randolph and the residents of Randolph really treasure. In my mind, I think of this as John's legacy. When I can walk up behind my house and go for miles, and it's there because of John and David and their ability to see ahead in the future. But of course, you have to have something to run this forest. So who's going to run it? John. So the Forest Commission was established. He, of course, was chair. And there was some muttering in town about taking land out of tax use and yada, yada, yada. But John proved to them by managing it for sustainable harvest, keeping it open for fishing and hunting and snowmobiling and hiking and mountain biking and just anything you really want, pretty much. Sugaring, there's a huge sugaring operation up there now. Keeps our watershed clean, which is very important to Bill and I because our water comes from Mount Crescent. And on top of that, he figured out how to do a sustainable harvest. The forest started making money early on in its life and began a payment in lieu of taxes to the town. I don't have the figures, but I know it was substantial. So therefore, this great community forest that began as an idea from an ice storm is now one of the largest community forests I know in the Northeast. And David would have to fact check me and the other things. But I know David and John and Jen went all around the country talking about our forest and how they did it and how we did it. And it's there. It's there from now until forever. The Forest Commission has many different viewpoints on it since inception. Multiple points of view were represented. It's managed with the long view in mind, so that we'll be harvesting it and doing things with it for decades. The hard work of it, when they were making roads, making wildlife openings, putting in culverts, doing all those things, you'd look, and there'd be a yellow excavator. Guess who was running it? Guess who was there trying to make it all work out right? John. John had his finger in every pie, and it was wonderful because we all trusted it.
Randolph Forest Commission, Randolph Planning Board, Coos County Planning Board, Coos County Conservation Commission, Randolph Mountain Club President, North Country Safety Council. These are all things that John was involved in. And in his spare time, Gorham Police Department, State Police, and Gorham Police Department in turn. He was a busy man, as we all know. My memories, and I'm sort of overlapping with Barbara, was also with the ice storm. And as she said, it hit all at once. There was really no forecast. We lost power on Randolph Hill for 6 days. Day one or day two, I was out on the road looking down through this forest of branches all going sideways, hanging over the road, tangled up with the power lines. And down the road towards Scarinza's driveway was a state police car sort of pulled halfway into the road. And I thought, I wonder what's going on down there, because you couldn't go anywhere. So I walked down through the tangle of trees with my hard hat on. And there was John. And some of you folks in the back of the room may not want to get all these details, but there was John with his car halfway out of the drive in his uniform shirt, but with jeans and chainsaw chaps on the lower half, and opening up the trunk and getting his chainsaw out of the trunk of the state car. And I knew this wasn't really authorized, but on the other hand, I also knew you do what you have to do, and John knew that more than anyone else. For several days, he and I would travel up and down the road, clearing the trees until we could get some volunteers to really take on the task. But clearing trees and cutting our way out, and then the end of the day, cutting our way back in, because trees are coming down constantly for days. Cutting our way back in so other folks could sort of form a convoy to get out and get shopping done and so on, so forth. But that's when I really got to know John and knew that if you had to bend a few rules to get things done, that's what it took. I don't know to this day if when he got out to Route 2 that first day wearing jeans and chainsaw chaps, if he stopped at the Grandview and changed into those uniform pants or not. I guess I'm not going to go there. He was also very active in the Randolph Mountain Club, including being president. And to the point where, at one point, we had an RMC dinner, and he sent out a short email to everyone saying that he was bringing a new friend with him that night, and who's sitting in the front row right now. And this was, of course, an eye-opener for everyone. It was like, oh, what's going on here? Now we all know, and that was a wonderful thing. John and Jen, I don't know how many know this, but their honeymoon, or at least part of their honeymoon, was a helicopter ride up to the Randolph Mountain Club cabin at Grey Knob. Then and still now, the Mountain Club airlifts firewood or fuel bricks to heat the cabin with. And the deal is that if anybody can go up and help put away, all the wood has to be put away that same day. So you get a free ride up to the mountain and spend 2 or 3 hours working like crazy getting all the wood put away as the loads come in, and then you can spend the night or do whatever you want the rest of the day. So in that case, that was John and Jen's honeymoon trip, and we went up to, and or I went up, I guess, on that trip, and put away all the wood, and then they were up there 2 or 3 more days, and I guess had a very good time. On another trip, though, and this is one of my fondest, I've spent many years hiking around the mountains, but one of my fondest memories was when Barbara and I and John flew up a year or 2 later, I guess, and we put in our time putting all the firewood away. Everything was done. It was just a beautiful fall, probably September day, and the 3 of us hiked down Spur Trail, stopped at Chandler Fall, had a nice lunch, fed the Whiskey Jacks, the Canada Jays, and it's just a really good memory I'll always have of the mountains and the Spur Trail and the birds and being with John for the day. So those are some of my memories of him. You have more?
I have a wonderful picture of Jen holding a just married sign outside the helicopter. Of course, I couldn't find it, I love the money, with her bridal veil just sort of flapping in the breeze behind her. And someday I'll find it again. The other thing I remember about that trip is John calling his hairdresser because he was going to be late for his haircut that day and changing the appointment. He also was the chair of something called the Planning Board in Randolph. Randolph doesn't have a bunch of zoning laws and things like that, but at some point a number of years ago we decided, or the town decided, that it would be important in maintaining the way out of life and what we like to do with our town. Of course, John did all the research and brought some ordinances so that the town was in compliance with the state. He worked very closely with the selectmen. Perhaps they remember some of those conversations a little bit more frankly than others, but John always got his point across. And at this point, we live in a town that allows expansion and things like that, but it doesn't allow things that, like strip malls and things like that. So we have a wonderful town that you can hike and walk pretty much anywhere you want. The commission sent a survey, I put down a few years ago, but I'll bet it was 10 or 15 years ago, asking residents what they want. And the planning board took that as their mission, with John in the lead. And it was to maintain the rural character of Randolph, to encourage small, well-managed businesses through land use ordinances, and to continue to encourage the community for their input. So we have John and his leadership on the planning board to help to thank for that.
Recognize many of the faces in the audience today, but for those of you who do not know me, my name is Lieutenant Michael Cody. I am the Troop Commander of Troop F, the same position that retired Lieutenant Scarinza held until his retirement in 2009. On behalf of the New Hampshire State Police, I want to start by expressing our condolences to Jen, Ethan, Vivian, Catherine, Susan, and Jeff, and all the extended family for Lieutenant Scarinza's passing. The sheer number of faces here today in the audience and the lines at yesterday's wake are a direct reflection of who John Scarinza was and the mark that he left on the New Hampshire State Police, the state of New Hampshire, and most importantly, the territory we refer to as Troop F, which for those of us that live here is more commonly known as the North Country. I will quickly go through John's distinguished state police career. John started his law enforcement career at the Gorham Police Department under then Police Chief George Gazy and a watchful eye of then Sergeant Jerry Marcoux. After a year, John was hired by the New Hampshire State Police in September 3rd of 1982. John worked his way through the ranks, being promoted to corporal in '83, sergeant in '96, assistant troop commander in 1999, and the coveted position of lieutenant in 2002, until he retired in 2009. Although John retired, he remained in the auxiliary status until 2018. Although John's distinguished law enforcement career stretches over 40 years, John was more than a uniform or the badge. John gave his life to public service. It was a lifestyle for John, not a job. As John made it through the ranks, he did not let patches nor pins on his uniform distract him to what was most important, the North Country, the place that he called home. I first really met John in 2002 when I was a young patrolman with the Gorham Police Department. During the next 2 years, I watched John in his role as a then assistant troop commander, then on to the lieutenant position. My admiration for his leadership qualities quickly led to a passion to wear the uniform he was wearing and being able to call myself a New Hampshire State Trooper. In 2004, I applied for and was hired by the state police. In doing so, I fell under John's command. As a rookie, I stood in rank accordingly. But as the years went by, it was clear that John and I had many similar interests. I found myself on occasion on a deer drive, alongside John at the Marcoux camp, a Halloween party at his brother Jeff's house, or just long conversations about generic North Country living tasks that needed to be done before winter while sitting on the tailgate of our trucks. Our friendship grew. After John retired, we became even closer. As my state police career expanded, I found myself following John's footsteps through the ranks of detectives, then sergeant, assistant troop commander, and now as lieutenant. During this marathon, John's leadership became mentorship. I would often find myself discussing the state police life, in which always brought a smile to the corner of his mouth. This was followed by a story that had similarities to whatever conundrum I had brought up for discussion. You could bet there would be humor to the story, but also subtle words of advice planted throughout said story. John had such a steady hand in whatever was going on, and even more, a vast understanding of most things. I know of no other man who knew how to install a septic system, know the intricacies of all the boards that he sat on, and could lead men through some of the most tragic state police events of our lifetime. As the years went on, it became easy to call John one of my best friends. Over the last week, as I prepared these words about John, I was flooded with great memories. But if I had to pick the best ones, they'd all revolve around hunting season. You see, as some of you may or may not know, John was not exactly what I would call a frequent texter. That would change, however, every November. Every day, and I mean every day, in late afternoon, I would get I would text from John that read, "On stand." That was to notify me first that he was on his deer stand before me that day, and elicit a response on whether or not I was going to be going to mine. Although I am under oath and cannot divulge the locations of these deer stands, as it would violate the sacred oath, I can tell you more times than not, I could hear his shot, of which I would wait for a second text, which would read something in the nature of, "I need help dragging." Although truth be known, he would wait what seemed to be an eternity before sending me that text. I'm certain it was just to keep me guessing. After the drag, it was story time, about how the buck made his way through the woods, and it was only inches to make this incredible shot. Whether these stories were stretched or not, I will miss them more than anything. Although John's passion for work and the outdoors were both the loves of his life, John found his soulmate, Jen Barton. Watching him become a husband and a father to little Ethan brought another level of love. Whether it was apple picking, sugaring season, harvesting the garden, or just time spent in the outdoors, they were inseparable. Although I'm sure John showed Jen some things about the outdoors, I am equally as sure that Jen showed things to John about the outdoors. As I stand here today and try to encapsulate who Lieutenant John Scarinza was, I feel like I fall short, no matter how hard I try or how many times I rewrote this eulogy. He was so much to so many. Honestly, his passing feels surreal, even at this early stage. John, I know how much you suffered these last couple of years and how hard you hid the pain. So although the selfish part of me wants you back to spend more time with, I know you are at a better place. How you lived your life is evidence of that. I know you can hear this today and probably wonder what the fuss is all about, as you are such a humble and caring person. You have rolled out the red carpet for many others who have left our ranks too soon. I think I speak for all North Country law enforcement in the entire community when I tell you your work is done. You can rest now. We got it from here. We will continue to watch over your family and never let your legacy die. It will carry on where you left off. The state of New Hampshire, the North Country, are safer today for the time you spent protecting it. I am also a better man for having known you. I leave you, John, with these parting words, my dear friend. On stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, Barbara, Bill, and Mike.
As a woman takes up her needles and her yarn, let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in the long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to the air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Scarinza, and I'm so very proud and honored to be John Scarinza's wife. Thank you so much for joining us today to honor John and remember him. I don't know if there are words to express what a special man he was and how much he means to our family, but I'm going to try. Bear with me. Yes, he's dialing the button. How's that? Is that better? Okay. Bear with me as we have a 2-year-old. Almost. And he knows there's a lot going on right now. So, but also bear with me, it was very hard to keep this short. Many of you know John for his roles in the public eye: policeman, community leader, general contractor, chairman of the boards, get involved, take it on, get it done, right, guy. I'd like to share with you about what John was like as a friend, my sweetheart. And the thing he was the best at was being Ethan's daddy. Okay. John was a good man. You all are all here because you know that. But I mean, he was truly just a good, honest, hardworking, caring, and thoughtful man. I also just really liked him. I used to tell him that. He thought that was hilarious. I'm like, I love you, but I really just like you too. We also know how funny and full of life he was. What a wealth of information and talent. He was good at everything he did, except maybe beekeeping. And the stories. My favorite ones were the ones that he'd tell me when I got home from school and he had done something that could have been maybe a little dangerous, but he got away with it. And he always started with, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he always did. It was so easy to fall in love with him. I had moved north to take a job teaching natural resources at the regional high school. A mutual Randolph sugaring friend thought we'd be a good match. When I finally met him in a sugar house on Maple Sunday, any concerns about a type A police personality quickly faded. Before long, we started seeing each other in more places. I'd go to a workshop about wildlife habitat or pruning apple trees and be thrilled when I spotted his familiar green pickup. We quickly realized that we shared the same values and lots of interests: sugaring, paddling, hiking, photography, gardening, and the list went on. I was completely smitten. What followed was many years of fun adventures and working on projects together, or vetting, as John called it. On Maple Sunday 2012, after a day filled with family and friends, and as the fire cooled in the evaporator, I proposed to him in the sugar house that we built together. He, of course, insisted we keep it quiet until he could do the things the right way. This is John. By talking to my dad, designing a beautiful diamond ring, and then presenting it to me in front of my whole family at my dad's 70th birthday party. We were married in a storybook wedding on a beautiful September day in 2013 in a field on Randolph Hill that faces the mountains. Several other couples have been married there, and we commonly call it the wedding field. In 2020, the field and the farm that goes with it came up for sale. After we very carefully decided we did not need to buy another house on Randolph Hill, John finally put an offer on it because he couldn't bear the uncertainty of what someone else might do with what he called Jen's field. That fall, on our anniversary, after he attended his monthly planning board meeting, of course, he took me to the field where he'd set up chairs and flowers and gave me the deed to the land. Our plan is to keep this field open space forever. John was the man who liked to do thoughtful things in a grand way. When I asked him to build an arbor for our wedding ceremony, I was thinking some nice birch trees bent into an arch. Not John. He designed and built a gorgeous timber frame arbor that took 6 men to put up. He spent weeks in the basement working on it and said that if he really thought he was going to actually use trigonometry, he would have paid more attention in high school. Another act of love that I will share with you is when he surprised me by rekindling his accordion playing. Did you know that he was an amazing accordion player? He used to play Swedish polkas as a little kid at Vassar Park in New Jersey. I love fiddle music, and so John gave me a fiddle as a wedding present and encouraged me to learn to play. I urged him to get back on the accordion. He said he would need a new one, and it would have to be bright red. Unbeknownst to me, he did a ton of research, bought one, and started practicing again, right in our house, after I fell asleep. Then at the RMC summer dance, they announced at the break that John would be joining them with his accordion, and he played our wedding song, The Lover's Waltz. I was completely blown away. I planned to learn that tune on my fiddle and play it for him in our wedding field on our 10th anniversary this fall, and I think I still will. John was devoted to our families too. As I was able to see his close relationship with his mom, I learned where he got his sense of humor and his care for others. He loved being Uncle Johnny and enjoyed following our nieces and nephews with their adventures, showing oxen, playing hockey and baseball, and now as they embark on careers and families of their own. We love teaching Blake and Austin about backpacking, and those trips are some of our most treasured memories. We were so glad we did Katahdin when we did. Last summer, the boys announced they were coming up to overnight at Craig Camp, and John was so proud and amused when they told us that, nope, they actually didn't need us to come. They were all set on their own. John said that baby birds have flown the nest. John died of multiple myeloma, which is essentially cancer of the blood and bone marrow. Many people have multiple myeloma and live with it as a chronic illness for decades. We originally were told he could have as much as 18 years, at which I burst into tears until he reminded me that would put him in his 80s, and just how long was I expecting him to live anyways? Unfortunately, John's form of MM was very aggressive and resistant to treatments. Leave it to my tough husband to have a tough cancer to fight. He was quite sick for a while, and most of you probably did not know that. And that was how he wanted it. John kept this cancer very private and plowed through it at full throttle, never letting up on all the things he did while still fighting this nasty disease and taking care of his family. He faced this the way he did the rest of life, with tremendous strength and bravery, and as much as possible on his own terms. We didn't go to Boston thinking he was not coming home with us. The treatment he went for had just been approved in October, and we were so very hopeful. And John was not living life like a man who was planning to die soon. In February, we tapped 200 maple trees. When we left for Boston, he packed a whole duffel bag full of tax information because if I'm going to be in the hospital for a week, I might as well get something done. At the same time, he understood how serious the situation was, and in the fall checked off several practical things to take care of his family: a new septic system, a roof on the house. Throughout his whole illness, he was just worried about us. We tried to keep things as consistent and normal as possible for Ethan. Whenever I asked John what else I could do to help him, he'd say, just take care of Ethan. He fought so hard and endured so much, and I am certain he lived as long as he did out of sheer grit and determination to stay here with his family. John was not fond of small spaces, so the PET scans were a challenge. He had a great time telling us about a new technique he used to keep his mind focused that only a new father could appreciate. He sang the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And he wondered what the technicians were thinking as they listened to him. Throughout his illness, John never complained, and he never stopped being himself. He regaled the nurses with stories, and even on the days when it seemed like he was foggy from the disease and painkillers, his humor came through with funny quips and answers to their endless questions. We are so very grateful for the care that we all received, and also for the blood and the platelets. And I do encourage you, if you get a chance in John's honor, to take that opportunity. It was life-saving, extending for us. Ethan and I visited with him in the hospital nearly every afternoon and evening, and he was just delighted in watching Ethan interact with everyone, a natural charmer like his dad. John wore many hats and was many things to so many people, but being daddy was what he was the most proud of. Unlike me, John had not always longed to be a parent. Like so many things in our life together, he did it for me. What an incredible, precious gift. Part of our decision to have a child at its later stage in life was based on both of us being very healthy at the time. John was funny. He said, well, the baby is going to be primarily with you until they're about 3, you know, when they're more fun and interactive. As he thrilled at Ethan's every new development, journaled each new word, and soaked up Ethan's love, I checked in with him on that, and we laughed. When Ethan was about 6 months, John would exclaim to folks, "I didn't realize they're little people," in his usual self-effacing way. He was absolutely delighted to be right there every step of the way and excelled at being a dad. When I was still pregnant with the baby we nicknamed Peanut, we began a nightly story time ritual, and this was one of our favorite family times. John was always looking for ways to help, buying sleep sacks, changing pads, and the very finest grip mattress. It was John's idea to turn our sunroom into a sunroom, as a fenced-in playroom with a padded floor and tons of toys and books. He just loved doing things with our little family of 3. Well, 4, if you count Ethan's ever-present excavator. We worked on the barn, planted bulbs, dug in the dirt or snow every day, watched the wildlife in the backyard. Ethan liked to get rides in Daddy's excavator and hang out in the kitchen to help when John was cooking. How he loved to tell about Ethan running into the kitchen with a pumpkin saying, cut it," to make a pumpkin. And chop, chop, chop garlic, onions, and peppers. We were so content to just do simple things together. Watching the 2 of them filled me with love and joy. It made me wonder, why is there no bigger word than love to describe this feeling? It just seems like there is something right in the world that John Scarinza has a child. And now it seems so wrong that he won't be here with us to enjoy him as he grows into a wonderful man like his daddy. But he packed a lot of memories into the 2 beautiful years that we had with Ethan. In his final weeks, even though he felt really lousy, he kept doing things for us. The seed potatoes arrived while we were in Boston, and John said, "I think there's some strawberry plants coming too." John was teaching Ethan about the moon and surprised us with a great moon nightlight. When Ethan started learning his birds, John set up bird feeders right outside his playroom window. We tapped a maple tree in the front yard and checked it every day we were home. And looking back, I realized that John was packing in as many memories and boo-boo kisses as he could, just in case. He was starting to teach Ethan about types of fish. He was so proud of how smart his little buddy is. And he said recently, he's the kindest little kid I've ever met. Ethan is so much like his daddy, sweet, smart, funny, full of spunk, and so much love. Our story, John and mine, is a story of true love, but it does not end here. This little boy carries it with him and brings it all forward for all of us. We taught Ethan some sign language, and one of his favorites is home. And whenever we pull into the yard, and sometimes he just looks around the house and says sweetly, home, and so cozy. John built this for us. He worked so hard for so long to be sure his family would be happy and comfortable. John is no longer on this earth, and no longer in pain. We miss him terribly. But he will always be with us, every minute of every day. everywhere. In the house, in the forest, in the sugar house, and the garden, and especially in our hearts. He surrounded us. He just surrounded us with so much love, and it will carry us through. John expressed concern that Ethan would not know who his daddy was and how much he loved him. We know that's impossible. But I can use your help with this. Consider sending us a story to be included in the book we're making for Ethan. It will be a very treasured keepsake for him. It would mean so much. Ethan and I will do all the things that John and I plan to do with him. And we are so very fortunate to have a tremendous community and family to support us with that. I'm incredibly moved and grateful to my core for this. We will plant the seeds that John ordered for us and plant flowers at his grave. We will grow pumpkins and make pie. We will pick berries, prune the apple trees, learn to hunt, go camping, play in the snow, train some oxen, and follow the fox tracks wherever they go. We will go to Booth Bay and we will swim at Grammy's camp. We will make syrup, hike the trails, explore the forest. We will do charades, play music, dance, and visit with good friends on the porch. We will go paddling, travel to far-off places, and be happy to return to our little piece of heaven, home, in Randolph, because that's what John would want us to do. We will honor John and all he meant to us in everything that we do. Although the time was way too short, I am so incredibly thankful and grateful that Ethan and I were part of this wonderful man's life. Truly.
Mommy's coming.
Hi, honey. Now comes your part. Almost done. Yes, remember what we practiced. Are we going to sing? So, if you guys would join us if you know it. That itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again.
Obviously, I made a mistake. I asked to go last, and after that, I'm president. For in case anybody doesn't know, I'm Jeff Scarinza, John's younger brother. And I asked Jen to give me a notepad. I don't know if you've ever been around John much or not, but a yellow notepad was usually his choice of taking notes and keeping track of what was going on and where he was at. So, fortunately, I was going to write on this one, but there's only one page left. He's pretty much used it up. But as I stand before you today, overwhelmed with emotion, and when I start to fall apart, because I know that's going to happen, please bear with me. The saying short life, or life is short, certainly hits hard in this situation. There's still so many things that I want to talk to Johnny about. I've written and rewritten this introduction many times, looking for the words, looking for the phrase, looking for a way to express my admiration. However, words cannot start to express our sadness as a family, our loss, and our brokenness. My brother was an exceptional individual. He wore many hats, as you've already heard. He impacted many lives, again, as you've already heard. For many of you, he was a friend. He was a boss. He was a member of the board. He was a volunteer. He was an assistant. He was a detective. He was a lieutenant. And I go on and on. For me, he was a brother, my only brother. Johnny was also a son. He was an uncle. He was an in-law. He was a husband, and most recently, a dad. Of course, John, or Johnny, depending on the temper of the conversation, had an extremely strong personality. And as most of you know, he'd be more than happy to express his offers or his opinions, especially if he felt strongly on the topic. And of course, we wouldn't want him any other way. I thought about it and I said, how do I describe my brother? How do I talk about him? How do I make everybody understand what we see in my brother? So I made a list of words. Tough, determined, dedicated, detailed, funny, thoughtful, loving, loyal, friendly, understanding, compassionate, competitive. And some of you may even add stubborn, analytical, homebody, and hard-nosed. I think they all fit. The common theme that rang true for me as I received emails this week, phone conversations, text messages, was that John will be dearly missed. He gave so much to his community, and he worked tirelessly to serve the public, and he was a character in so many people's stories. In the past week, my family members and I have received countless messages, all relaying how John had such a huge impact on their lives. Some shared that they chose to pursue law enforcement because of John. Others said that he spent time comforting them when they were in a place of need or had gone through a rough patch, or how he showed interest in them so that they could help believe in themselves. I'd like to share one quick letter quickly. This individual wasn't able to attend today, but he wanted to make sure that John knew he was thinking. He started with, "Hi Jeff, I wanted you to know I worked with John for a number of years. I'm so saddened by John's death. He was a great man and a dear friend to me. We had a lot of fun working together. And John was one of the guys you could always trust. There was a time when I was on the outside looking in, over internal politics, which I always tried to avoid, but at times they just seemed to get in the way. I was having a particular hard day, and John showed up at my door with a six-pack, and we sat and drank a few beers and talked for hours. At the end, I felt much better. Your brother was a stand-up guy, a true friend. I will miss him. Send love and strength to your family from me." This was one of many correspondence that people have shared with me, explaining how John touched their lives. When I started to write this eulogy on the top of my legal pad, because that's how you do it, I wrote the words story. John had a knack for telling stories, and he learned it from some of the best. He listened to adventures from the old guys in town, Jack Boothman, Tom Beam, Freeman Oldham, Jack Humphrey, Lloyd Carpenter, Paul Doherty, are just a few. Hunting stories, fishing stories, and other adventures, as this group had traveled the world and had endless stories to share. A few titles that were some of the favorites were Clinkers in the Firebox, Lobsters in the Jump Seat, Medford Engine 5, Lost on Mount Randolph, Raccoon Hunting, Basement Bob House, we'll have to get into that one later, and The Great Pillow Heist, Night Patrol in Jefferson, and let's not forget the Marlboro Man. And if Brian and Steve are here, they'll have to tell that story themselves. A few titles. I'm confident that John's copy of Smoke from a Thousand Campfires has many pages that are found to be specials and re-earmarked for future reads. John was a historian of sorts, and telling stories was one part of that. I often thought that someday, when he finishes all his projects, he might actually sit down and write himself a book. Nah, just kidding. If anybody knows the Scarinzas, they don't finish projects, they just take on more. In case it's not obvious, Johnny was 12 years older than I am. He found great joy in telling my adult friends about some of the most embarrassing times or adventures, as he called them, when I was growing up. He would always start with, "Hey, did you ever hear the time or the story about how Jeffrey burned my bulldozer? Or stole the carburetors off my snowmobile? Or built a wooden hang glider and decided to jump off the barn roof? Oh wait, I got one better. How about the time he decided to ride his big wheel to Ramsey's farm at 4 years old, down the highway? Or the time he got lost on Randolph Mountain. We'll leave that for a later time. I guess that just goes with the territory of being a younger brother. I won't bore you with any of those stories right now, but I will share them with Ethan when he gets a little older. And I'll attempt to tell him with the same masterful way that my brother would. This reminds me, everybody seems to have a story or a favorite story of John, or one that he'd like to tell. I know Jen mentioned it earlier, but sadly Ethan won't be able to experience these stories that his dad would tell in person. So I'm asking for my brother, in the next couple of days, while the memories are fresh, the thoughts are clear, and the sadness is real, that you share some of these stories, some of these memories. And I hope by doing this, it helps you with your grief and your sadness, knowing that it'll provide Ethan with a glimpse of his father from your perspective. No donation could be more valuable than your memories, your thoughts, and of course your stories. By the way, the hang glider story, it's true. And even though my brother was very courageous, to this day, even after I received my private pilot's license, my CFI license, he has declined to fly with me. His general comment was, "Buy a float plane and maybe we'll talk." I'm sad to say we didn't get that flight in. Summertime in the 20s, or in his 20s, you could find him riding his motorcycle, drag racing his pickup truck, or playing softball, and of course, sleeping. That man could sleep anywhere. Did I mention that he was competitive? Softball in the 80s was an outlet for competition, and it seemed like there were games all the time. John lived in Shelburne at the time and worked for Gorham PD. So it was not a surprise that he played for the Gorham team, Reds Auto Body, with names on the roster like Robbie Bolash, Steve Fisk, Alan Demers, Gary Crotto. The team that Grandview sponsored from Randolph, of course the Randolph Mossbacks, had names like Dwight Bradley, Dwight Eustace, Will and Davis Woodruff, and it was always a well-known rivalry. The competition was fierce, and the games were exciting to watch. It seemed like a much simpler time. In my opinion, John's love for the town of Randolph blossomed in 1988 when he bought a plot of land on Randolph Hill. In 1989, he cleared the land of the lot and started construction of his current house. The building crew was John, of course, Steve Emerson, Brian Ruel, Jeff Smithson, Chris Dorkel, Sean Renus, and myself. Now let's face it, to say he had a crew of studs would be an understatement. The thinking was left to John and Steve, and the roof trusses were measured and cut out by our father, John Scarinza. I didn't realize at that time, but this would be the only building project that all three of us would work on. As Mike spoke about hunting, hunting has always been a pastime of Johnny's. And I fondly remember days of walking through the apple orchards and the fields attached, looking for partridge, or hit in a pine grove to flush a few birds. John carried a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun, and on the way out of the woods, he would always set up some cans for a little target practice. I'm sure that shotgun's still in the gun safe, because as we all know, John seldom parted with anything. We'll get to that later too. If you've ever had the chance to hunt with John, and I'm sure many of you have, you probably realize that it's one of his most passionate pursuits. He took it seriously. No, he took it really seriously. He liked to hunt in small groups and quite often alone. Unless, of course, at Marcoux Camp. I fortunately wasn't present for many of those hunts, but we did pull off a 2 bucks for 2 brothers on the last day of the season one year, and that's a true story. I have a picture. Weight slips and photos are required for a confirmed kill, because I'm sure, as you know, the tails can grow long, the weights can get heavier, and the pictures are never of the right deer. So without those items, you just wouldn't, or you couldn't trust the facts to be true. I never understood it, but it is amazing how much heavier a deer can get after it hangs for a few days, right, Jerry? On the topic of hunting, John always wanted to keep his hunting spots protected. This was a lot of work. This could include, hey, I need to ride down to the end of the hill, you gotta drop me off, because I don't want to leave my truck. Or, hey, park your truck at the pull-off, but I'll come pick you up and we're going somewhere else. Anything to throw somebody off the trail. We backtrack, we park a decoy truck, and several other things just to keep everybody guessing. To keep things really interesting, and Cody and Jerry, I'm not sure if this is news to you or not, but he would name his tree stands. These names could be similar to areas in the North Country, like Pond of Safety, Pinkham Bee, Jackknife Field, or Gorham Heights. All of these were code names. These were actual areas of his actual tree stands in the town of Randolph. That allowed us, brothers, to always have the same story. We might have got that deer at Pond of Safety, and that was Pond of Safety. That was where the stand was. That's what we tell everybody. As far as I know, John and I are the only 2 that have the master list. And Blake and I will make sure that he gets a copy. Hey, on a side note, did you ever hear why Johnny never got an archery license? Susan knows why this is the case. But 8 years ago was the first time he ever applied for an archery permit. It seems, the story as best told by Susan, and hopefully she'll add it to the book, is Johnny had a bow and arrow when he was a teenager in New Jersey, or maybe a preteen. It seemed he got tired of stationary targets. And with the assistance of Tommy Martin, he convinced Susan that it would be a good idea for her to run across the backyard, as he wanted something real to shoot at. I think he had a few hits before he decided it would also be a really good idea to shoot an arrow straight up overhead and let all the neighborhood kids scatter. Yes, again, I think he had a few successes, but as you can imagine, the unlucky individual required stitches. Bow and arrow was broken, and he was forbidden by my mother to ever have one again. I'm sure if you knew, he got his permit a few years ago. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured. In his professional career, Johnny was 100% committed to the brotherhood of the state police. He, like the fellow troopers, were proud that whatever needed to be handled got done, and it got done to the best of their abilities. I know there are cases that he thought about often that had a hold of him like unfinished business. It was in this very room 13 or 14 years ago, at the age of 50, that we celebrated his retirement has a distinguished career in law enforcement. But let's get back to the stories. John was also confident enough to tell stories that not always put him in a favorable light. One that comes to mind is in February of 2002, when Austin was born. Excited to meet his new nephew, John left the barracks in Twin Mountain and headed for the hospital. Upon his arrival in Berlin, he headed straight to the nursery area, where he met with a nurse and requested to see the Scarinza baby. The nurse promptly informed him that there was no Scarinza baby, and in fact there hadn't been a birth there for 2 days. She made the comment to him, perhaps he was mistaken. John's immediate response, while dressed in his state police uniform, was, "Do I look like I'd be mistaken?" He then called me and said, "Where are you?" I responded with, "4th floor, room 6, Littleton Hospital." Silence on the other end of the phone with a quick response of, "Be there in 45. As he told the story, he tucked his tail, apologized to Nurse Ratchet, and headed his cruiser towards Littleton. This could be another chapter in John's book. I think it was alluded to earlier, but I'm going to revisit it. John always seemed to have a state police special issued tactical vehicle. It was a limited production, one of a kind. It was equipped with the standard gear, of course, safety flares, blankets, foul weather gear, shotgun, radar. Not good enough. John had to add the essentials. 4-foot level, a skill saw, a job belt, a 100-foot tape measure, a framing square, some assorted nails and screws, and a tile sample or two, or maybe some roof shingles. Joint compound, just in case. You never know. His dedication to public service didn't end with his retirement. In fact, I think it shifted into high gear. John could be found at the planning board meetings in Randolph or in the county, at the town forest committee meetings, on the board of the North Country Safety Foundation, Randolph Police Department, RMC. I think Bill and Barbara went through the majority. We used to joke with John, or at least I did, that he probably needed to call the governor when he was going to leave the town, because otherwise they'd just be short-handed. He had no real reason to leave the North Country, because this was his home. And he would protect it at all costs, and everybody that lived within the geographical boundaries. He also said the North Country was a special place. But my estimation, and I believe it was a special place because he helped make it one. John was always prepared, and often knew the questions, or the answers to the questions before he'd ask them. I assume years of detective work honed these skills. He would carry around a yellow legal pad, Exhibit A, and always add to the to-do list the things that he wanted to get done. I'm guessing there's a legal pad on the kitchen table, on the coffee table, on the dashboard of his truck, and of course in his think tank, yes, the bathroom. Man, could he spend time in the bathroom. So much so that when we built his house, we wired phone cords to every bathroom, just in case. John, in your honor, I brought with me the legal pad, and I put together a to-do list. And I believe you've checked all the boxes. So like in the movie, The Bucket List, I put together what I believe yours might have included. Helping a complete stranger. Check. Laugh until you cry. Check. Kiss a beautiful girl. Check. Witness something truly majestic. Check. Be part of something bigger than yourself. Check. Watch the sunset with the woman you love. Check. Find joy in your life. Check. And last, leave a legacy that will live on forever. Check. In closing, I leave you with this song that I think truly describes my brother John, sung by Gabby Barrett.
He's a phone call to his parents, he's a Bible by the bed. He's the t-shirt that I'm wearing, he's the song stuck in my head. He's solid and he's steady like the Allegheny runs. He knows just where he's going and he's proud of where he's from. One of the good ones. He's one of the good ones. Love me like he should, one like he wrote the book, one. The kind you find when you don't even look, one. Anybody can be good ones, but he's good all the time. He's one of the good ones, and he's on mine. He's one of the good ones. You'll know him when you see him by the way he looks at me. You'd say he hung the moon, I'd say he hung the galaxy. Nobody does it better, all the way he pulls me in. I've known a couple bad ones, but they all led me to him. He's one of the good ones. Love me like he should, one like he wrote the book, one. The kind you find when you don't even look, one. Anybody can be good ones, but he's good all the time. He's one of the good ones, and he's on mine. He's one of the good ones. We should all find us one. They're out there, minus one. Some of the good ones. Yeah, I got a good one. Love me like he should, one like he wrote the book, one. The kind you find when you don't even look. Anybody can be good ones.